All right, immigration. Here are the essential questions for immigration. Why do people want to immigrate to the U.S.? What was life like for the immigrants in the U.S.? Some of these you might be already be able to answer, but we'll see what happens here. We're going to start talking about the symbol of immigration in the United States, and that is the Statue of Liberty. Okay, now growing up as a kid, I always thought that the Statue of Liberty came over like on a big boat and they hoisted it up and set it on the island, but there was actually a long process to that. It actually came over in 214 crates. It was built onto a steel structure, and then it's kind of amazing, really. The funny part is that those 214 crates sat there for a long time because nobody knew who was going to pay to build the Statue of Liberty, and it actually took donations from regular Americans like me and you to get it done. Joseph Pulitzer will actually donate the base from the donations of his papers, and basically just through donations, people sending nickels, dimes, quarters in, that's how it's going to be constructed. It was donated by France, and here we go. Donated by France, and you're going to recognize this one name, dedicated in 1886 by Grover Cleveland. The Frederick Bartholdi designed it, and then Gustave Eiffel actually was a structural engineer, and we know that name because of the Eiffel Tower. And if you look at the Statue of Liberty, if you look at the construction and how it was done, these are all little parts that were put together inside, under her robes, I guess is what you'd say. There's a steel structure that actually kind of looks a little bit like the Eiffel Tower. So very similar construction design. It took 25 years for it to turn the color it is today, turn that green from the oxidation. It's 305 feet high, weighs 225 tons, so it's a big old girl. And there's a poem at the bottom written by Emma Lazarus, and I'm not going to read the whole poem, but I'll read you the most popular, most famous ones. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free. That's one of the most famous lines there by Emma Lazarus. She has 7 spikes on her crown for the 7 continents, and there's some other things that people have said that represents as well. There are chains at her feet, which represent her breaking away to freedom, and there's a tablet that she's holding, which has the Roman numerals that stand for July 4th, 1776. And the torch is meant for that. She's lighting her way to freedom. You used to be able to go up the Statue of Liberty. I don't believe that you can do that any longer, but you used to be able to go up that thing. All right, well, let's talk about why. Why come to America? Okay, one of the biggest things is the natural disasters. You know, some of these things are still happening today. We see a lot of people come over for different reasons, natural disasters being one of those. The potato famine is probably the most famous one. The potato famine was during the early 1800s, 1830s, 40s, and it was probably a very deadly time. A lot of people starving to death, and people were probably just desperate to get out of there. It lasted 1845, 1849, about 4 years, and the population dropped in Ireland 8.4 million to 6.6 million. Over a million Irish died, basically because their potato crops, which was their staple, I mean, that's what everything they ate was wrapped around, they just didn't grow, and they were diseased. The ones that did grow were diseased, and a lot of people blame the British because they weren't really allowed to grow anything else. They're under British control. So many people left. Okay, so we'll start to see that happen in the 1840s. And a lot of you that with Irish backgrounds, this is you probably trace your families back to during this time period. Political upheavals. Think about what was going on in Germany. Remember the rebellions across Europe in 1848? Germany, they came up with a new government, political freedoms, and things like that. And then the conservative governments came in and shut it all back down. The kings and the monarchs would come back in. You guys learned about that last year. Those people can stay, but they're probably going to be persecuted, jailed, even killed. So we see a lot of those people, those same people that were looking for liberty and freedom in their homelands, come to America, and Germany especially. A lot of peasants bought up tracts of farmland in the Midwest, including Ohio. Some artisans and intellectuals tended to go to New York, Chicago, Milwaukee. But many of you have a German background, and probably you can trace your family's roots back to this. Propaganda. People would actually send recruiters to Europe to get people to come to work in these factories. Problem is, a lot of the things that they were telling them weren't necessarily true, maybe exaggerated, the idea of the American dream and things like that. But at the same time, it was also an opportunity for those people, and especially in a time of an economic depression in Europe, they were looking for more opportunity, and people took it. Most immigrants had the idea of going back to Europe eventually, and it just never happened. So it wasn't necessarily going to be a full-time thing here, but that's what it ended up being. The Industrial Revolution in Europe brought an end to small farms, so people had to move to the big cities in Europe, just like here. And it took jobs in the factories. When they got laid off, they came to America, trying to improve their living conditions, better pay, and even escape religious freedom. That's something that I did not mention here, but that was a big part of it too. Trying to escape religious freedom, come to America where you can worship as you please. So those are very important. Most of these reasons are still the same as they are today. We still see a lot of people coming to America for the same reasons. Here's some trends. I'm not going to expect you to write these numbers down, but just so you can see it. 1790 to 1830, very little immigration. We start to see it pick up in 1830, with especially in Ireland. This is during the time of the potato famine, the beginning of the potato famine. We'll see about 750,000 Irish Catholics come straight from Ireland to America. Also the English, Scottish, Welsh, German, Norwegian, Swedish, and Danish will all come over as well. In the 1860s to 1910, we see about 30 million immigrants come to America. After 1890, many of those would be from Southern Europe, Italy, Greek, some of those other Slavic countries. My family came over in actually 1912 from Sicily. I'll tell you some of those stories later. But we'll also see a lot of Japanese come over during this time. And about 1 out of every family moves to America during this time. So some of the hardships when they get here, it's something they didn't think about. First of all, the trip. The trip across the Atlantic would last, depending on when and depending on what kind of boat, 40 to 15 days. On average, 1 in every 7 people would die on the way there. So that's not exactly the way you want to start. Most immigrants from 1892 to 1854 came through Ellis Island, about 16 million to be precise. They were basically processed there. There's a museum. I don't know if any of you guys have been there, but there's a museum there today. You can actually maybe even look up some of your family names in there. The Statue of Liberty is nearby Ellis Island. The Statue of Liberty is on Liberty Island, which you can see it. Often look like cattle processing station. You can see the kids in line. They're carrying everything they have right here. That's everything they owned. The trip was long and hard. Usually, unless you had some money, you were going to be on the lower decks. It's basically, they kind of treat you like cattle. Language, very difficult. You might not understand a word of what the person processing you through this is saying. It's why many names were changed during this time, including my family name was changed. And I'm sure some of you may have some other stories yourself. Most of the people that came here were unskilled laborers. They were going to have the worst jobs, the lowest paying jobs, because they're taking whatever they could find. Males usually came over first and sent back for their families once they could afford it. Same thing, living conditions, kind of same thing with their jobs. They're going to take what they can get. So most of them will live in slums. Many close to those port cities. And you can still, some of these ethnic neighborhoods still exist today. Almost every big town has a Little Italy or a Chinatown or something like that. And may not be the same kind of people that live there, but that's what started it. New York, Brooklyn was big for the Italians. And people would try to stay close to their own ethnic groups because that's something that they were familiar with. They could understand the language. Unfortunately, a lot of these things were also in bad neighborhoods with very little money, and so a lot of slums there. Discrimination. Many immigrants were discriminated against by Americans already living here. They called themselves nativists because these immigrants were kind of messing up the job market. They were willing to work with and for whatever they could get. So you see a lot of competition for jobs. You see a lot of different customs and religion begin. Social clubs, ethnic neighborhoods would start up. Just take Van Day. You got the Irish club in Dayton. There's a Polish club. There's a German club in Englewood. And there's an Italian club. And those things are still in existence. Back then, it was so you could be with people that were like you. Obviously today we're removed from that a little bit. The new immigrants would set up meeting places with these people so they can be with people around that they knew. Okay, here's some pictures from the time period. Here's a political cartoon. You see all the immigrants getting off the boat, taking their jobs. Here is an American, a Native American with his family out of work, tools on the ground. So all these people are coming in. This is, I believe, of Brooklyn. This is some of your family, Italians especially, would be in these places, Greek. This is Chinese and Japanese Americans from the time. They're actually building the railroad through here. And like I said, a lot of discrimination because people would actually prefer these immigrants because they literally would work for almost nothing just to have jobs. This will give way to what we call nativism, the KnowNothings. KnowNothings were a secret organization whose members claimed to know nothing when asked about their party. Their official name was the Order of the Star-Spangled Banner, and they were basically against Catholics and any other immigrants that came in. Okay, a native was somebody that was born in America, and they stressed that those were the true Americans. And another example, the Plug Uglies. This is a gang out of New York that they threatened to beat up people, or even worse violence than that, kill people if they didn't do what they were told. And political bosses and these machine politics basically used the Plug Uglies to enforce their will on these immigrants. They use these immigrants. As they got off the boat, the immigrants needed somewhere to stay. They needed a job. And these political bosses promised them, hey, you vote for me, and you get your friends to vote for me, I'll take care of you. I'll make sure you get what you need. And that's how these political machines really began. And it became almost like mafia-style politics, only legal. You were voting for them. So it became more and more involved. And, Catholics, especially, one argument, and you could say, we've only had one Catholic president in our history. We've had one vice president, our Catholic president with JFK. The vice president is Joe Biden. He's Catholic. But a lot of people didn't trust the Pope, who's a leader of the Catholic Church. And they believed that the Catholic Church at one point was trying to take over America. So a lot of that comes from this too. Now Millard Fillmore was actually a know-nothing president. He was president number 13. Back then he was a Whig. Served 1850 to 1853. Took over when Zachary Taylor died. But Millard Fillmore was actually a know-nothing. He belonged to the American Party in 1856. So we actually had a president, a member of a secret society called the Know-Nothings, who favored American politics. Now, part of this as well, we see a lot of Asian people come over during this time, and it was actually nicknamed the Yellow Peril. Okay, because once again, the same thing as we see on the East Coast, people believe that they're going to take their jobs, their cultures are different, and blah, 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 blah. So the Yellow Peril is going to threaten us, and so they start to pass these things one was called the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, where basically put a quota on how many Chinese were going to be allowed in the country because they're afraid they're going to take their jobs. This is actually 1917, this map here. Anywhere in green is where people were barred from immigrating into the country. Hard to believe now. Immigration Restriction League in 1894 actually put quotas on and made people pass a literacy test. Now you could take the test in your own language, so it wasn't an English test, but you had to prove that you could read. So that was another way of trying to get people to limit their... Oh, went too far. And then lastly is Teddy Roosevelt, who will be president number 26. We'll talk more in depth about Teddy shortly. He actually went into an agreement with Japan called the Gentleman's Agreement. The Gentleman's Agreement, and basically agreed to keep Japan's laborers from migrating here in 1907, and Japanese would be totally barred from immigrating in 1924. So these are some of the things that we haven't really learned in history before, but here's one of our most famous presidents, and he's part of the act as well as barring these people. Okay, that is it.